There's a lot of crazy stuff going on in the world right now. The biggest war the world has seen since World War II. You have arguably a genocide happening between neighbors. A lot of crazy stuff. One would say, oh, these people, the victims of these events, they're getting robbed of their human rights. I'm going to make the argument in this video that human rights do not exist. And the very idea of human rights actually allows these certain events to happen. And actually, it would be better for us to not believe that human rights exist if we want there to be less tragedies, less genocides, less war in this world. As always, I'm going to be using the works of a greater mind than you and I, Mr. Friedrich Nietzsche, in order to make my point. So I think the first place that we should start off is to talk about where the idea of human rights or natural rights even came from. It came from this philosopher named Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who believed basically that human beings are inherently good, that society or the wrong society will corrupt human beings. He has this idea of the noble savage where human beings back before societies were a thing were like naturally good, I guess. That's a very reductive way of describing Rousseau, but basically he thinks that human beings will get along, and if we were just left to our own devices, but if we're put in the wrong society and the wrong structure, that's when we turn on each other. Now, on the other side of him, there's this other philosopher, an English philosopher named Thomas Hobbes, the author of the Leviathan, who believed in the exact opposite. He believed that human beings are inherently evil, we're inherently flawed, and in order for us to civilize ourselves, we need to be in the right society. And so America, France during the French Revolution was inspired by this idea of natural rights. Now, both of these philosophers, along with the famous English philosopher John Locke, popularized this idea of the social contract, which, based off of this idea of natural rights, the government and the individual have this relationship with each other where the individual will sacrifice some of their own individual rights in order to be protected by the government or the society, and the society or the government will uphold these rights based off of the natural rights of human beings. Speaking from an American perspective, and you probably learned this in school if you're paying attention, men have inalienable rights, right? The life, love, and the pursuit of happiness. That whole idea is inspired by the social contract theorists. More specifically, in America's case, we're very much influenced by Rousseau and John Locke. Now, this sounds wonderful and nice, right? That we all inherently have value, that we all inherently have rights just because we are human. It sounds great, doesn't it? Well, it's a big fat lie. It's a lie that has worked out in some cases, but I would say in other cases it completely hasn't worked out because it's just an assumption. It's a value-based assumption that's based off of nothing. It's a complete leap of faith like religion is. And a lot of people consider this to be like the holy grail of philosophy, of grounding ethics inside of logic or inside of reason. It just can't be done. And this is where Nietzsche comes in. So Nietzsche believes that values precede logic and reason. You cannot divorce logic and valuing. All right? We are inherently value-based creatures. So I'm going to read you a very famous passage of his from Beyond Good and Evil to make my point, because he can say it much better than I ever can. This is from Beyond Good and Evil, aphorism number 3. Behind all logic and its seeming sovereignty of movement too, there stand valuations, or, more clearly, physiological demands for the preservation of a certain type of life. For example, that the definite should be worth more than the indefinite, and mere appearance worth less than the truth. Such estimates might be, in spite of their regulative importance for us, nevertheless mere foreground estimates, a certain kind of niaiserie, which may be necessary for the preservation of just such beings as we are, supposing that is, that not just man is the measure of things. So basically what he's saying is that any sort of logical claims that we have, or any sort of propositions that we have, are in the foreground. In the background, what's actually happening is our valuations. And so, especially in the West, in the logos-based, Christianity-based West, where Christianity believes that truth is God itself, that truth can be found within, by discovering God, by studying God, that you can sort of divorce logic from emotions or logic from valuing, that these two things are completely separate. What Nietzsche is arguing for here is that these two things are not separate. You cannot seek the truth without going through a lens of valuing. So anytime you're trying to seek the truth, it's because you want to seek the truth. There's already a value proposition there that you believe that seeking the truth is valuable, therefore you do it. If you didn't think that seeking the truth was valuable, you wouldn't do it. So therefore you cannot divorce logic from valuing. This idea of there being a logical order to the universe, something that's universal, something that's logical, that's ubiquitous, is so deeply ingrained within us that we don't even question it. Nietzsche is really one of the first and only thinkers, really powerful thinkers, that have questioned logic and objective truth itself. So if we look at this from a Nietzschean lens, these social contract theorists start off with the value judgment of, we want to build a great society. We want to build an ethical society. And then they work backwards from there. And so Thomas Hobbes, Rousseau, and John Locke, they all have different reasons for coming to the same conclusion. So it's almost like a consequentialist way of thinking. They say, okay, how do we make a good society? They work backwards from there. So Rousseau came up with the idea of, the noble savage. Thomas Hobbes came up with the idea that we are inherently evil. We need society to make sure that we're not evil. John Locke has the idea of the blank slate, that we aren't good or bad when we're born, that we become good or bad based off of how we're raised, because we're just nothing from the start. So if we're raised in a good society, we're going to be good people. If we're raised in a bad society, we're going to be bad people. And all of these philosophers just assumed this value judgment before making the logical case for it. And this is something that was almost sort of like a beautiful mistake, almost like a beautiful miracle, because it allowed common people to start to have power, to start to have rights, but it is just an assumption that they had. And based off of this Christian worldview that was pervasive back then, and even now, we always believe that there must be the truth. There must be some logical thing. So they couldn't say like, this is my opinion, right? I want this to happen, therefore let me say that I want this to happen and find reasons for it afterwards. No, they had to basically act as if that was the truth itself, right? In order for people to listen. So the West, America more specifically, although it's not explicitly founded on Judeo-Christian values like most people think. Most of the founding fathers were deists, so they believed that God existed, but he created the earth and then just didn't care after that. They still have the values of Christianity through social contract theory and the idea of natural rights. This idea of natural rights, again, being that we naturally have rights just because we're human, which is a derivative of the idea that we are made in the image of likeness of God, which is a very Christian idea. And the idea of natural rights, at least the way that most people interpret it, is that it's sort of this ontological thing, meaning that it's a sort of inherently part of the world. It's like a natural phenomena, rather than just a natural interpretation or a moral interpretation of that phenomena. This leads me to another Nietzsche quote, which goes, "There are no such thing as moral facts, only moral interpretations of the facts." Now, the reason that I bring all this up is I really want to hit home the fact that this idea of human rights existing and not just being this thing that we made up started from Christianity, Judeo-Christianity, I guess you could say. And then with the Enlightenment and the social contract theorists, morphed into this idea of human rights that even people who didn't believe in religion can sort of start to adopt and believe in. And the only way that modern scientific people could actually take that idea seriously is that it's based off of logic. It's based off the logos. It is truth itself. The social contract theorists would not have been successful with spreading this technical lie without claiming it to be just the truth itself and not just their opinion. Okay, so now with all of that out of the way, it's important for me now to point out why I believe the idea of human rights is actually very dangerous. It's actually really simple. When we see evil people do evil things based off of the Judeo-Christian society we were brought up in, along with the whole idea of the social contract, we believe that human beings are naturally good, that it is an abnormal thing for somebody to do something evil, like committing genocide, like waging war against innocent people. We think, oh, there must be something wrong with them. Now, if that were actually true, that's one thing. However, if that was actually untrue, that human beings are actually naturally evil, as most people put it, they're naturally hateful, they're naturally cruel, then you are just being ignorant and blind. Ironically, you're actually blinding yourself to the truth that human beings are not those things at all. And then so when humans do terrible things to each other, you're just sitting there with like a shocked Pikachu face, when in reality, that's how human beings actually are. If we can actually see human beings for really how they actually are, not lie to ourselves with the idea of natural rights or human rights, that we're inherently good and therefore that goodness should be protected, then we can make sure that the right leaders are in the right place, that we can actually hold these people accountable. And we can also acknowledge that there's this natural side of us that wants to be violent and cruel. It's part of the human condition. And instead of just pretending that it doesn't exist, suppressing it or repressing it into the shadow, we can actually let it come out in healthy places so that it doesn't come out in unhealthy places, such as waging war against innocents or committing genocide against people just because it makes you feel good. I know that sounds like such a radical idea, that people commit genocide against other people because it feels good, but like biology and just what we know so far, just scientifically actually, backs this up. Our chimp cousins are absolutely brutal. History backs this up too. All of human history, even after the so-called, discovery of human rights or whatever, has been absolutely brutal as well. It's inherently part of human nature. And so let's talk about the whole Ukraine situation for a second. People were always just assuming like, oh, there's no way Putin's gonna do what he does, or there's no way that the Israelis are going to do XYZ to the Palestinians or vice versa. It's like, no, if you weren't lying to yourself about human beings naturally being good, then it's inevitable. You know that that's going to happen. You look across history, you look at how human beings actually are. Of course that shit was going to happen. It was just going to happen eventually. The only way in which you can deter those things from really happening is making the pain of taking that action of taking over another country far greater than the actual pleasure of going and conquering those people. So for example, I'm going to get a little bit more political here. Let's take Taiwan and China, right? The reason I don't think personally that China is going to attack Taiwan is because they know that the US is going to come in and kick their ass if they try it, and it'll probably start World War III, right? So the consequences of that happening are huge, absolutely huge. Ideas like natural rights have led us to believe that war is the exception. And that's a very dangerous idea, because if we believe that war is the exception, then in times of peace, we're not going to be prepared for war to happen again. We're going to assume that there's going to be this perpetual peace, and that's just, it's a fabrication, it's a fantasy. When instead, if you can get rid of the idea of natural rights, get rid of the idea that human beings are naturally good, then you can look at human beings for how they really are. Then you can prepare for the natural cruelty of human beings, especially in big groups, especially when they're ideologically driven. Assume that's going to happen and prepare for it to make sure that there's no gratuitous cruelty in this world. I really hope this video made sense, man. This is kind of right at the limit of what I feel like I can talk about. Not that I think that a whole bunch of other people are better at talking about it than I am, although I'm sure there are people that are. It's just that you're kind of getting to the very limits of how you can think when talking about topics like this, because you're just going like so meta. It's just very difficult to like put into words sometimes, But I hope I did my best to interpret Nietzsche from a modern context. And I hope potentially that I might have changed some of your minds about natural rights and human rights. And if I didn't, I apologize. I tried my best. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comment section below. And I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.